It's a lot to this conversation.
It is a lot to this conversation, but it's so heavily weighted. People don't want to be objective about it. Perhaps you, like me, were raised essentially to think of the slave experience primarily in terms of our black ancestors here in the United States. In other words, slavery is primarily about us, right from the Crispus attacks and Philip Wheatley, Benjamin Banneker, and Richard Allen, all the way to Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Frederick Douglass. Think of it as an instance we might think of as African-American exceptionalism. In other words, it is the black experience. It's got to be about black Americans. Well, think again. The most comprehensive analysis of shipping records over the course of slave trade is the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, edited by Professors David Eltis and David Richardson. While the editors are careful to say that all the figures are estimates, they believe that the best estimates that we have, the proverbial gold standard in the field, the study of the slave trade between 1525 and 1866, in the entire history of the slave trade to the New World, according to the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World. 10.7 million survived the dreaded Middle Passage, disembarking in North America, the Caribbean, and South America. How many of those 10.7 million Africans were shipped directly to North America? Only about 388,000. That's right, a tiny percentage. So a small percentage of all the Africans that were enslaved were actually shipped to North America.
That's probably closer to the truth.
It's an honor to testify on a topic as important as this one. Nothing I'm about to say is meant to minimize the horror and brutality of slavery and Jim Crow. Racism is a bloody stain on this country's history, and I consider our failure to pay reparations directly to freed slaves after the Civil War to be one of the greatest injustices ever perpetrated by the U.S. government.
This landmass we call the United States.
What do you mean you don't believe it?
I don't believe that story.
You don't believe that Africans were brought over on slave ships?
Correct. I believe it may have happened, maybe people were brought over as slaves, but I don't think that the black people in America came from Africa on slave ships. I believe the people that were here were slowly conquered. First, they got the East Coast, and then they started spreading out west little by little, conquering. And when you conquer a tribe, what do? You enslave them. They're POWs.
But I worry that our desire to fix the past compromises our ability to fix the present. Think about what we're doing today. We're spending our time debating a bill that mentions slavery 25 times, but incarceration only once, in an era with no black slaves, but nearly 1 million black prisoners.
How do you raise a people's level of awareness about this stuff? And how do you elevate them to want to do things in life when they think they are a slave?
A bill that doesn't mention homicide once, at a time when the Center for Disease Control reports homicide as the #1 cause of death for young black men.
Yeah, you had the thing called black codes. And if you were considered black, then you didn't have rights. People were already here. Does it make sense to go all the way to this other continent to bring people on a boat when we know that half of your stock is going to die? You wouldn't do that.
So how many people do you think were brought over from Africa on slave ships? Because that definitely happened.
I don't believe it.
Now, I'm a little confused about something. Your name, Oludara.
Yeah.
You don't seem, that seem like an African name. You don't seem African.
You know why I don't seem African?
Why?
Because I'm American. You know why I don't seem African?
Why?
Because I'm American. You know why I don't seem African?
Why?
Because I'm American.
I'm not saying that acknowledging history doesn't matter. It does. I'm saying there's a difference between acknowledging history and allowing history to distract us from the problems we face today.
The thing I found about the Egyptians in Ohio was actually from a paper that was written. It's postulating it. I guess they took a lot of the evidence that they had been finding and saying this shows that there might have actually been Egyptians there.
That's from 1937?
That's when the guy was, I think, born. This is 40 years ago.
Oh,
so
wow.
That amulet was brass, apparently, and it was found near Cincinnati. And where I actually think that it might have been trade routes, because there was some, like, stones that have been found in various parts of the world that are from specifically Ohio, because it's like a rainbow shale that was used in like arrowheads and stuff a long, long time ago. Like that area was used to make weapons, like the first, like 12,000 years ago when the first people were kind of in North America. But that area in Ohio also is known as the sandstone capital of the world, and I don't know if that's related to the Egyptians, because that's what the pyramids are made out of, you know. There's tons of sandstone that is very specific to that region.
Yeah.
So,
Pyramids made out of sandstone?
I thought so. Yeah,
I've heard this,
there's
yeah.
21, from 1800 to 1980, 21 times the amount of sandstone that made the Great Pyramid was shipped out of Ohio to make various buildings all over the world.
Really?
Most of them in the United States, obviously, but all over the place.
In 2008, the House of Representatives formally apologized for slavery and Jim Crow. In 2009, the Senate did the same. Black people don't need another apology.
Yeah, you had the thing called black codes. And if you were considered black, then you didn't have rights. The funny thing is you could be technically African and be white. White isn't a color, it's a status.
We need safer neighborhoods and better schools. We need a less punitive criminal justice system. We need affordable health care. And none of these things can be achieved through reparations for slavery.
When we talk about the Moors going into Spain and into Europe, the stories in the history, our history, says that when we met the so-called Caucasian, he was sleeping in the barn with the animals, and we told him, no, you can't sleep in the barn with animals. We taught them etiquette. We taught them running water. We brought that technology to Europe. Now, if we brought the technology to Europe that saved Europe from the Black Plague, you mean to tell me that if we saved the white race, white isn't a color, it's a status, that we weren't already in America already?
Nearly everyone close to me told me not to testify today. They told me that even though I've only ever voted for Democrats, I'd be perceived as a Republican and therefore hated by half the country. Others told me that by distancing myself from Republicans, I would end up angering the other half of the country. And the sad truth is that they were both right. That's how suspicious we've become of one another.
Canaanland Moors presents Common Sense Quickies. What we do here is we add some common sense thinking to everyday situations or comments that may arise. Want to give it a try? If Canada gives you Canadians, and Mexico gives you Mexicans, and Brazil gives you Brazilians, then the United States should give you United Statesians, not Americans. America is a continent, not a country. And that is why it is called United States of America, meaning United States belonging to America, or United States from America. America is a continent separated in name only: North America, Central America, and the adjoining islands, and South America. So the next time you're in the presence of someone talking about those Americans this and those Americans that, or I'm going to America, or American politics, each time they mention Americans or America, interrupt them and ask them, wait a minute, which Americans? From which country? Or disagree with whatever they are saying and start talking about a random country in the Americas, like say, Paraguay. And if the person speaking says they are speaking about people from the United States, just say, oh, you mean United Statesians, not Americans. Common sense was made before book sense.
So when Christopher Columbus got here, Christopher Columbus got to the Caribbean, according to a primary source.
Right.
They basically said the first thing he did was take slaves. He didn't bring slaves. He took slaves from the island. He captured people. So when you have colonization, you got to remember, the United States was only built 13 colonies at first, right? You think this whole land was empty? No, there were natives here.
Right.
But today we're taught that natives is some other people. No, natives are the melanated African being that has come here since the beginning of the Mali Empire. We're talking about 14th, 13th century. We had already come here from Africa.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had already come here.
To the United States or to
this landmass we call the United States.
That's how divided we are as a nation. If we were to pay reparations today, we would only divide the country further, making it harder to build the political coalitions required to solve the problems facing black people today.
They believe that at one point in time there was a civilization of 20 million people living in the Amazon, and that when the European settlers came over, they brought smallpox and wiped everybody out.
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom.
Just like they did with the Native Americans. That's another thing that people don't know. When they talk about Native American genocide, the vast majority is disease.
It's disease, yeah. So when people say, oh, you know, the white man came over here with violence, I'm like, nah, I don't know if he was that violent. I don't think he had enough bullets to kill that many people.
They killed 90% with disease.
With straight disease, man.
Which is fucking crazy.
So where did disease come from?
Europe. Dirty people.
So how can
in the
you,
streets.
So how can you
Rats.
tell me that, you know, I'm just a slave, right? When the filth, the degeneration of Europe is what came to America.
We would insult many black Americans by putting a price on the suffering of their ancestors. And we would turn the relationship between black Americans and white Americans from a coalition into a transaction, from a union between citizens into a lawsuit between plaintiffs and defendants.
Now, the argument is, were we brought here or were we already here? Did we bring ourselves here or did the white man bring us here? You see, when you say the white man brought us here, what you're doing is you're removing our ability to transport ourselves. You're saying, oh, we didn't know anything about boats. That's what you're trying to tell me. You're trying to tell me that we didn't know that there was a landmass here. Only the holy white man knew there was land to the west.
What we should do is pay reparations to black Americans who actually grew up under Jim Crow and were directly harmed by second-class citizenship, people like my grandparents. But paying reparations to all descendants of slaves is a mistake. Take me, for example. I was born 3 decades after the end of Jim Crow into a privileged household in the suburbs. I attend an Ivy League school. Yet I'm also descended from slaves who worked on Thomas Jefferson's Monticello plantation.
Look at these Olmec heads.
Yeah.
They all looked like that.
Yeah, that's South America.
Yeah.
So
it's
if you have
amazing.
There has to be a large population of people in order to create these things, right?
Yeah.
It has to be, you know, these have to be advanced. So if they're here already in South America, why are you gonna go across the sea when you got people right here you could just enslave? South America is connected to America. You think we didn't come up north? You think we didn't take that whoop?
Right.
That's just common sense.
Well, particularly when they're finding all this evidence of people that were here thousands and thousands of years before they ever thought people were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the evidence in the Grand Canyon from Egypt.
What? I didn't know about that.
Yeah,
What's that?
You heard about that?
Part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
What is there might be some gold down there.
Ooh.
Is this
Egyptian gold in the Grand Canyon?
Hey.
Imagine if they found a fucking Egyptian tomb in the Grand Canyon.
There's Egyptian stuff that's been found in Ohio.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
All
Well,
over
I was
the-
looking some stuff up. My grandma's telling me. I went home and looked up the Serpent Mound stuff, and like right up the road from where the Serpent Mound is, there's been a couple artifacts found there, like 100 years
Egyptian
ago.
artifacts.
They're called mounds.
Pull that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's mounds in America, which supposed to be like pyramids or whatever. So
There's even an Egypt, Ohio. I don't think it's named after that, but it's literally like in the same spot.
So reparations for slavery would allocate federal resources to me, but not to an American with the wrong ancestry, even if that person is living paycheck to paycheck and working multiple jobs to support a family. You might call that justice. I call it justice for the dead at the price of justice for the living.
Wow.
Yeah,
yeah, this
The history of human travel is fucking fascinating.
we've circumnavigated this globe before, man. This isn't new stuff. It's new to Europe. It wasn't new to the African race, man. Yeah, we been here. They got the mounds, the archaeological evidence from Egypt and the Grand Canyon. It's right there.
See, I've never heard that before. That is interesting. Archaeological evidence in the Grand Canyon.
Because it's not part of his story. He's got to keep you thinking. He's got to keep the black people thinking you were slaves and you came from Africa on boats. That's what they got to keep you thinking.
But you really think that there's some sort of a grand conspiracy to withhold information?
Yeah.
There is a naive assumption that wherever there is a statistical gap in outcomes between two groups, that gap must be attributable to some kind of discrimination, whether that's overt or whether that's structural and systemic. That assumption is not true.
But a black face ain't gonna make you no brother today. Go ahead! We tired of these black-faced, white-hearted Go ahead! Say that! Masquerading as though you love your people. We see you!
I mean, there's the Olmecs, who were thousands and thousands of years ago in South America. They have clearly African faces.
Yes.
I mean, really, the noses, the lips, I mean, they look African.
Right.
And that was a South American culture that existed, and we don't know anything about them other than the fact that they have these gigantic stone sculptures that have African faces.
I understand that reparations are about what people are owed, regardless of how well they're doing. I understand that. But the people who are owed for slavery are no longer here, and we're not entitled to collect on their debts.
Again, I've studied this so long ago, but I remember reading primary source from somebody that traveled with Cristobal Colon, a.k.a. Christopher Columbus. And he was saying very specific things about his accounts when he reached these different places. You know, and he was saying things like, we got to the land and we found Africans. And I remember him specifically saying, so no matter where we go, we find Africans. And he said it as if he was disappointed. And then they started talking about, like, you know, they started talking about their culture and describing their culture. You just got to go look at the people that travel with Cristobal Colon. And there's some firsthand accounts there. And they're very honest about it, you know.
Reparations, by definition, are only given to victims. So the moment you give me reparations, you've made me into a victim without my consent. Not just that, you've made 1/3 of black Americans.
You had the thing called black codes. And if you were considered black, then you didn't have rights.
Who poll against reparations into victims without their consent. And black Americans.
You had the thing called black codes. And if you were considered black, then you didn't have rights.
Have fought too long for the right to define themselves, to be spoken for in such a condescending manner.
And say, well, yeah, you know, if there is a reparations conversation, you know, that was the Democrats, that was the Dixiecrats that installed black codes in South Carolina. They're the ones that...
That's an interesting conversation, right, when you say that?
Yeah.
And like, wait, what? It's actually the Democrats are responsible.
Yeah, you had the thing called black codes. And if you were considered black, then you didn't have rights. The funny thing is you could be technically African and be white. White isn't a color, it's a status.
Facts I found after Graham came
History
through.
of the humans.
We don't know history.
We know some. Right?
The only history that we know is the one we go discover on our own time. The one that's presented to us is not history. It's all lies.
Today will tell you that thousands of years ago, the black man in Africa was living in palaces. The black man in Africa was wearing clothes.
As we race for a new day, give praise and acknowledge. The sun rays lift my black skin, turn solidly, absorbing the natural energy. Like the cocoa and yam crop flourish abundantly, like it was meant to be. Eating jelly plum until my gums are numb. But my brothers are still young, guess I should pick them some. I gotta share, but shine without a bruise or blemish. Who would've known we would encounter a fate so hellish? Our strength is unprecedented from here to Kemet. Driven by righteous incentives, we innovative and inventive. My father does metalwork, fire, mold, metal, goldsmith. Warrior tribe, we'll survive if we stay close-knit. We lived our lives through good vibes until the wicked man that lied arrived. Offering bribes, waving guns and knives. They came from an ignorant nation, black in pigmentation. Do you remember conversation or this confrontation?
The man in Africa had mastered the arts and the sciences. He knew the course of the stars and the universe before the man up in Europe knew that the earth wasn't flat. Then if the black man in Africa had reached such such a high state of civilization so long ago, at a time when the people of Europe were crawling on their own floor.
When I must take me dead for nothing. Slave ship packed to the back, man in the fam stack, raving and fussing. Rave ran cussing out of when there's something in my last part, my bedroom with the map way is disgusting. Right now I would love a man moving in the space. I'm losing my mind, I need space. Vomiting, it's stress up in the place, it was sickness. Gotta beg you reach, make haste. While we lie down, some cries die down. I do anything to see my village on my eyes now. Good grief for them mama shriek. It's like it's a bad something we ain't ready to see. Ain't nothing this deep since Moses led the Israelites out Egypt into the great Red Sea. I'm saying, deep down these are the works of a sinister gender. Wicked in splendor, do you remember?
To make these people or enable these people to come out of the cave and come down into our civilization and take it over and hitch us to the plow. What happened? How did they do it? These are the things you should want to find out before you say hooray, hooray, hooray. Is that right or wrong?
I'm sitting on a branch of my mango tree, sucking a Julie, saw a ship and tucking my jewelry. They moored the boat off the shore, it kinda moved me. This is the Mississippi River, not a slave movie. People looking like me, chain, ankle, and wrist. Paleo lift hit my bros and sis with whips. Not knowing better, thought I can't let this slide. Suddenly some finger food started burning my eyes. Kicks to my ribs, burning my sides. Plus no one knows that I'm gone. Birds sing a sorrowful song. Soon I'm shackled with them and the horror goes on. Walking for miles, winter weather burning my corns. Destination unknown, many died, those kept alive became property of the enemy tribes. Should I take my life? I couldn't decide. From master to a prisoner at the blink of an eye. Why?
How could so few white people rule so many black people? This is the thing you should want to know.